In this series of podcasts, we will be exploring the concept of culture industry. I am your host, Zoe More, and this is the culture industry. The concept of cultural industries, the creation, industrial reproduction, and mass distribution of cultural works is not new. In the first half of the 20th century, the term culture industry was introduced in one chapter of a five-chapter book, The Dialect of Enlightenment, by Frankfurt philosophers Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer. The concept of culture industry was formed on the basis of Marxist analysis of the evolution of Enlightenment thought and Western rationalism. They realized that all the cultural content, that is, human artifacts, consist of materialization of labor, meaning they incorporate labor and realize its intentions, thus creating two interrelated but distinct aspects. The first one is materialization of labor, that is, a product of labor is a use value. As such, an artifact has utility for someone. Example, a piece of firewood. Or the second, materialization of labor is an objectivization or embodiment of meaning or significance, as well as the institutional conditions which preserve the monopoly, that is, the artistic significance. Example, a book of poetry. That is, one could always start a fire with a piece of firewood as well as with a page of poetry, highlighting its utility rather than its poetic significance. We will call all artifacts where significance predominates over utility as cultural products. In particular, we are concerned here with the cultural products which made up popular culture in Adorno's conception, including film, horoscope, jazz, magazine, radio, soap operas, television serials, etc. More than half a century has passed since they developed the concept, and during this time, the ways of creating, producing, and distributing cultural products has changed dramatically. Cultural industries have adapted to technological advances and the evolving place of media in society, so sophisticated production processes and large-scale distribution methods to reach global markets. Theodore once observed that what distinguished Freud's analysis of mass behavior from earlier efforts was the absence of traditional contempt for the masses, and that instead of inferring from the usual descriptive findings that the masses are inferior per se and likely to remain so. The culture industry is associated with late capitalism, in which all forms of culture, that is, from literature through films and all the way to elevator music, become part of the capitalist system of production, which also has deep cultural mechanisms and not just economical ones. According to Adorno and Horkheimer, these cultural products are not only meant for profit, that is, appealing to the lowest common denominator, but also produce consumers that are adapted to the needs of the capitalist system. Music, film, art, literature, and other forms of culture were not being the products of anonymous artists, but were being cultural goods that were manufactured and distributed on a massive scale by powerful organizations and had become little different from other industrial products such as food, car, clothing, footwear. The United Nations Creative Economic Report of 2008 defines the creative industries as being the cycle of creation, production, and distribution of goods and services that use creativity and intellectual capital as primary inputs. They constitute a set of knowledge based activities focused on but not limited to arts, potentially generating revenues from trade and intellectual property rights. Adorno and Horkheimer argued that by being spectators of the ideal world that is represented through advertisement and films, citizens forget their own reality and thus become easily manipulated. They argued that mass media had entertainment as an objective because entertainment is meant to be in agreement, and to be in agreement is possible only by insulating itself from the totality of social process. Marxist critics have long seen this influential cultural industry as a classic example of monopoly capitalism, focusing on how these long-lived corporations colluded to devise ways to maintain their power and cultural imperialism. While Wall Street celebrated 20th Century Fox and Paramount's co-financing of Titanic, Marxist critics would see this as yet another example of studios working together, not competing, to maximize profit. Since there were at most 8 players, they did not have to worry about going out of business, but simply seeking how much they exploit and keep in profits. The long-term propensity towards concentration of ownership, endemic to monopoly capitalism, was simply exemplified by the Hollywood motion picture industry. That is what history would teach us, and that is how Hollywood has behaved even in the face of new technology. The cost that was needed to produce a cultural product in the 20th century was very high, but when a product was done, it was possible to make a lot of copies at low price. This process of production motivated one cultural industry characterized by producing few products for a global market. Cultural industry is one of the fastest growing industries, and the added value of culture industry is more than 10% of GDP in developed nations. In 1992, the Center for Humanities at Wesleyan University in Massachusetts grouped together a team of cultural theorists and executives from various sectors of the American culture industry to participate in a semester-long seminar titled Making and Selling of Culture. That was a remarkable attempt sponsored by the Coca-Cola Foundation for academic critics to reach out to cultural producers to explore how the latter imagine markets and consumers and to ask if they knowingly create and shape our wants. Adorno and Horkheimer indicate that it requires education to derive moral benefit from art, but that such education cannot be given to the masses. This is the primary focus for criticism served on them from within the Marxist community. The consequence of their position is that one needs to be a member of a limited elite in order to achieve emancipation from capitalism. That liberation is impossible for ordinary people. If mass consciousness is so corrupted that that is beyond the power of art to transform it, there is nothing to indicate that the corruption of consciousness is any less grave among the elite, even though it may take a different form. Indeed, there is nothing as indicative of one's having been conditioned by late capitalist ideology as the belief that one's intellectual knowledge of the system liberates one from the constraints of such conditioning. Please keep tuned in for the next episode. Thank you.